Hi, and welcome back to Ricoh GR 101, episode 5.1, Aperture Priority. I'm going to split this video into two. We want to keep it short and sweet for the fun stuff. And then I'm going to make a second video, a part two of episode 5, that will incorporate some little facts and details about depth of field, which are nice to know. Are not critical, but depth of field is a knock-on effect of your aperture, and it will affect things like snap focus and full press snap shooting with the Ricoh GR3 and the GR3X and the previous GRs as well. So, aperture priority, getting into the fun stuff now. This is my preferred way of shooting. Not because I have any favorite, it's just easy. There's less to think about, but you have creative control over the camera. So we're going to switch the camera on, and we're going to press this little nub down here, the lock button, and we're going to throw that dial on over to AV. That is aperture value in some camera languages, but in it's generally known as aperture priority. Now, one of our subscribers, one of our clan, asked if the previous changes we made to the baseline settings for minimum shutter speed and max ISO and things like that, will they remain in place after we change from P to AV? And yes, they will. You can see on top of the camera here now, we've got RAW Plus on top of the display there. That was a change we made in the previous video in episode 4. And if I go into the menu down here, hit menu, go all the way up to the camera icon, and go up to page 2, if I remember correctly. We've got your ISO setting, or ISO. That is still on auto. I'm going to go down to that, go in there, and you can see that changing from program mode to AV, or aperture priority, did not affect the previous settings that we did. So upper limit on the ISO on my camera is still 3200, and the minimum shutter speed is still 1/10 of a second. Okay, so aperture priority, what is it? Why use it? Well, when you're in aperture priority, the default settings for the camera will be that this front dial will change the aperture, and the rear jog wheel will have control over exposure compensation. The camera will take care of the shutter speed and the ISO. Okay, so you can see down here, it's showing you this little bridge kind of icon here with f2.8. So as I roll that dial towards the right, it goes all the way up to f16. It's gone down to the minimum shutter speed that we set in the baseline parameters in the previous video at 1/10 of a second now. And then it starts ramping up the ISO, because that combination of 1/10 of a second and f16 in these lighting conditions are not enough for the camera. So it starts ramping up the ISO. It will avoid ramping up the ISO if there is enough light. You can see it's starting to flicker now around 1/10 of a second, 1/13 of a second, and the ISO is remaining at 100. The camera likes to stay at the base ISO so it doesn't have to amplify the signal coming from the sensor when you take a shot. That's all it's doing, really. It's an electronic signal. It goes from the sensor through the image processor, and if it can keep it at ISO 100 without ramping it up, without amplifying that signal and possibly introducing noise, then it will rather do that. So that's how you use it. You go and you take shots, and if you want a deeper depth of field, you just roll your finger over to the right and say keep it at f8. In these lighting conditions here, it's going to be 1/10 of a second. Now remember, the slower the shutter speed, you will introduce motion blur into your shot. If that's what you want, that's fine. Remember the example about going down a train station or a subway, picking someone out in the crowd who's standing motionless. This is a bit of a cliched shot now. Everybody's doing it, but it looks good. Train rushing by, lots of motion blur, and one lonely figure maybe on the train platform, on the subway platform, standing perfectly still. That 1/10 of a second will grab them, keep them sharp, and you'll have some nice motion blur from the train. It looks good in black and white, looks good in color, looks great. So that is Aperture Priority. Now, in the next video, episode 5.2, I will show you the effects of Aperture Priority and what that does to your depth of field and how that affects snap shooting. Okay, and then yeah, we'll talk about shutter speed priority in episode 6, and then we'll start looking at some more fun stuff like snap shooting, snap focus, full press snap. Okay, that's it for this episode. It's very, very simple. Switch over to Aperture Priority AV on the dial there, and you've got your aperture control here in normal daylight conditions. Doesn't even have to be bright sunny conditions, but in normal daylight conditions, with your Ricoh GR3, set that thing to f6.3 and you're good to go. The shutter speed will be a decent high enough value to freeze motion if that's what you want, and the ISO will be low, so you'll get some fantastic shots just shooting at f6.3 in Aperture Priority. If you want to lower your shutter speed, just ramp it all the way up to f16 and you will start getting some motion blur in your images. If you're out shooting at night, then open that sensor wide open and maybe focus on what you want to shoot. You will still get some motion blur if the light is very limited, but all in all, these are creative aspects of the GR3 that any camera for that sake. These are some creative things you've got to figure out to yourself. Do you want motion blur? Do you want to freeze your subjects? This is where the fun begins, and Aperture Priority is my preferred way of doing things. So whenever you figure it out for yourself, go out, get shooting, enjoy yourself. See you in the next video, part 2 of this, episode 5.2. That will be coming up soon. See ya.